Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to our webinar today, our year-end process webinar for Dynamics GP. Now, this is always a very popular webinar, and we can definitely understand why. Whether it's the first time you're doing your year-end within GP, or whether you've done lots of year-ends in the past and you just want to have a little check to see if there's anything's changed, or whether you've done year ends previously, but maybe you've just recently upgraded. So this might even be your first year end within the current version. So for whatever reason you're here today, we've got a great session for you, and we're going to run through the processes and procedures around a year end. We understand it is an important time of year, and we know that we don't want to, well, we know that we want to get things right. So this session today is about helping you to make sure that we get that year-end process right for you. Now, having said that, we're going to do a great presentation, and I'm here with Susan Sue, who's going to take you through the presentation today. But please don't think that you're on your own. Remember that if you do have any questions, you can reach out to our support team. If you need help, you can always book a consultant, and they can actually help you do the year end. So again, we understand that it is a once-off. Well, hopefully it's a once-off process for you, and it only happens once a year. But if you do need help, we're more than happy to help from a consulting perspective as well. So before we get started, there's just a couple of little logistic items I want to let you know. Firstly, if you have any questions during the session, please just pop them in the right-hand side of your GoToWebinar panel. You can write them in at any time during the session, and we're going to allow a few minutes at the end of the session today to answer those questions for you. We will record this session as we always do for you, and we'll send you a link to the recording after the presentation. So sit back, relax, and enjoy your year-end session. Now, your year-end session today is going to be presented by Susan Sue. Susan's certainly one of our experienced Dynamics GP consultant, having implemented several sites and also upgraded sites from various versions of Dynamics GP. And one of the things that Susan's certainly passionate about is making sure that users like yourselves are maximising the value of your GP solution. So not just using it the same way year after year. So this year-end presentation is focusing specifically on the year-end process. However, Susan also is really happy to help people and organisations get the most out of your Dynamics GP solution. So on that note, I'd like to welcome Susan, and Susan will take us through the presentation today. Now remember those questions, pop them in the right-hand side of your panel, and we'll answer them at the end of the session. Thanks, Susan.
Thank you, Michael, and welcome everyone. Without further ado, Michael's giving us a great opening of the presentation. So without further ado, I'll just dive straight into the presentation. Okay, as Michael introduced, the end of the year is always the busy period of time for any organization that has to use a accounting software as Great Plains. And now this presentation, I'm going to cover those three areas. The first thing we're going to talk about is how do we prepare for an end of the year process in GP. And then we're going to move on to the actual process and what's actually happened, what's actually happening as part of the year-end process, module by module. As Michael said, if you have any questions for the presentation, put it down first, and then we will cover them in the last section, which is a question session. Okay, let's begin. The GP end of the year process, usually if an organization wishes to be able to do year end for the sub-modules, the typical sub-modules that we usually would want to do end year process for your inventory module, AR, AP, and fixed assets. They are the typical sub-modules that we need to do end of year process 4 if you so wish. But general ledger and fixed asset module are the 2 modules that you must do end of year process to get the data processing for the future year, as well as some of your key financial reports working correctly. So I'm going to cover the end of the year process in the right sequence as recommended by How GP Works from Microsoft. Okay, so before we run the end of year process for each modules, there are a list of things we need to check and prepare for. Let's start from inventory module. So as a preparation checklist, we always want to make sure that we post all inventory related transactions for the year you are going to close before the end of the year process. Obviously, if we don't do that, the end of year results is not going to be accurate. And also it's always critical and crucial to do a backup of the company databases that you're going to run the end of year process for. The reason for that is that all the modules end of the year process is a non-reversible process from a GP database backend data flow perspective. It is vital that we always have a end of the year backup, or several actually, sometimes end of the year backup before we start end of year process. And obviously when we say we need a backup, which always at the same time, meaning that there is a potential possibility that we might need to restore backup. Therefore, if during the end of year process we have users still process live data in GP, then in the event we do need to restore backup, then those processes will be lost. So as another note, then it is always advisable, ask all GP users log out from GP during the end of year process. Okay, for the inventory end of year process checklist, we also recommend that we run a reconcile and check links on the inventory module. Now this process can be run in GP by going into Microsoft Dynamics GP and maintenance check links and select inventory as a series from the drop-down list. So if you are not familiar with this part of the GP navigation, after the presentation, we are going to send out a recommended GP guide end of year process. So in there, we'll have the screenshots as well as the path, navigate to the applicable screens on there for you. So don't panicking, but just allow me to go through the presentation by running through the checklist. And also part of the preparation for end of year for inventory, we need to complete a physical inventory count and post any adjustments for the closing financial year. And also print any additional reports that you think is critical or crucial for your operation, and then make another company database backup. That's recommendable. So once that's done, then we are ready to run the end of the year end of year process for inventory module. And this window is under Dynamics GP Tools, Routines, and Inventory. You will find this end of the year window there. That's where the end of year process for inventory can be processed. We can then, after that, close the financial period for your inventory using the financial period setup, which is under the company setup area. This is optional, but it's recommended that you do that. So that, we're preventing anyone by mistake or accident posting to the close the financial year and end up, having a batch stuck in the process somewhere that needs to be fixed. So after the module end of year process, again, we strongly recommend that we do a company database backup. So throughout the presentation, you will see this company database backup will come up over and over again. So it's just emphasizing the importance of a backup copy of the database in case any step during the end of year process we're running into issues. Okay, now this is just a checklist for inventory module. So what actually is happening as part of a module in end of year process? There are a number of things happening behind the scenes, and some of this can be viewed from the user interface within GP. So for inventory module, the end of year process transfers or summarize the current year quantity, cost, and sales amount to transaction history for items for which you've been keeping summarized sales history. Now, what that means is the end of year process in the background database perspective is shuffling data from an open table into history as part of the process. And also items beginning quantity to quantity on hand at each site will be updated as well. At the same time, quantity sold field in the item quantity maintenance for each of your site will be 0. If there are discontinued items that we've ticked in the module, then as part of the process, we can choose to remove those discontinued items. So this remove discontinued items, one of the options on the inventory end of year process window. And also purchasing receipts for item that have been completely sold can be removed as an option. Remove any lot contributes if you use lot numbers in GP inventory module from the records of the lot number item. It will be removed if you have sold the item out, and update the standard cost of each item to the current cost. And this is if you are using FIFO or LIFO periodical valuation method. And again, that's one of the options you can tick as part of the inventory end of year process. Okay, so this is what's happening in inventory module as part of the year-end process. Now let's move on to AR. Now, after inventory end of year process, either you do AR or AP, that's okay. But inventory module end of year has to be done before either AR or AP module. For AR, which is accounts receivable module in GP, there are also a list of things we can prepare or go through before the year-end rollover process. Those things includes that we need to make sure post all transactions for the year and complete month-end processes. Make a backup before we do the following operation. We can then, after the backup, run a reconcile and check link routine on the sales module, sales series. And we can then, after that, close the AR module in the financial period setup window. We can also then close the tax period using the financial period setup window. Again, that's optional. After all that, we can then make another company database backup. So what's actually happening in GP as part of the AR end of year process? Those are the things that would like to highlight so that you can understand what year-end does in AR module. So firstly, the year-end will affect the year-to-date field in the amount since last close view within the data summary window. And this data summary window, you can find it under card sales summary. So that's how you navigate to that window and you can view the data there. And as part of the year end in AR module, it'll also close the calendar year as well as financial year. So this will clear the calendar year-to-date financial charges and move them to last year last year calendar charges in data financial charge summary screen. And the same, it'll do that to the financial year, meaning it will transfer all amounts of the calendar year to year-to-date financial charge amount to the last year column. Now, where can you find those screens or the view to see those data, which is under cards, sales summary again, okay? But in a lot of cases, I've experienced the organization don't really relying on that window or that view to get information out for the AR part of the financial data, like year to date, and what is the historical information. To ensure the data display in this window accurately, what we need to do is we need to really run the AR end of year process prior to we start processing AR transactions to the future or the next financial year. In a lot of cases, organizations can't always be able to do that. So if we run the AR end of the year process after we already post a transaction for the next financial year, then as I mentioned before, the data in these two views or the screens won't be accurate. But again, there are other reports and ways we can get you the information from within GP. So this is why organizations not really that fussed about when they actually do the AR module end of year process, or whether they actually decide to do it at all. So there are organizations out there don't even do the sub-module year-end process simply because they can't do it right at a clear cutoff time because of the nature of the organization's business or process. Okay, now let's move on to AP, which is accounts payable module. Again, there are a list of things we need to do to prepare for the end of year process. Things like, we need to ensure postal transactions for the closing financial year, and also, again, take a backup of the company database, as always, and run a reconcile and check links on the AP module. Now, all of those you'll notice that as we go through the other modules, is kind of a routine thing to do. You post all transactions, make a backup, and do reconcile and check. After that, we also recommend you to print aged trial balance with options in AP module. And if you wish, make another backup of the company database. Now you can start the year-end process in AP. Now the year-end process window is again under the AP routine area. Once we closed AP year-end process, we can choose, it is optional for you to do now, or also go into the financial period setup window to close the purchasing module, which is just to simply put a tick there under the purchasing module. Again, tax period closing is optional if you wish to do so. And then after that, we do another backup. So very similar process as how we do the AR module end of the year. Now, what's actually happening as part of the year-end process in AP module, those are the things that we can observe after the year end. Now, AP end of the year is only going to affect amounts since last closed view within the creditor yearly summary window. The creditor yearly summary window is where you can find that as under cards purchasing summary. And if you select a particular creditor ID, then you can view this window. It has basically 3 columns there. I'm just trying to describe that. The first column will show year-to-date data. So obviously after we run the end of the year process, any transactions prior to the point that end of the year for AP is run will move into the next column, which says last year. And prior to the year end, anything in the last year column will now be adding on to the 3rd column, because live to date. So imagine that I haven't actually got the window to show you. As I said, we just want to get the presentation moving. So imagine that there are 3 columns in that screen for each creditor that you can view. So those are actually is based on when we run the actual year-end process for AP. So similar as AR, the timing or the moment we run end of year process will move everything that's posted prior to that moment. So if you have already posted transaction for the future financial year, at the time when we run end of year for AP, those posted transactions will be moved into last year. So this is again a timing sensitive module when it comes to year-end process. And for any reason, an organization won't be able to have a clear cut in timeline wise for AP end of the year. People, there are cases that organizations don't even run end of year for the AP module, which is not a critical thing to worry about. Okay, as long as you don't purely relying on that window I just mentioned before to inquire about creditors' transaction history in terms of how much is year to date, how much is last year, and what is the live to date transaction amount. Because there are other ways within GP we are able to present the information for you if you so desire. Okay. Again, after that, we can go into the financial period setup window to close the AP module for the financial year that you are closing. So quite straightforward process for AP as well. So the next module we're going to talk about for year-end process is the fixed asset module. Now, fixed asset module is one of the modules, as I mentioned before, is a module that we must run end of year process for. And we must do that before we run the GL end of the year process, but after the AP end of year process. The reason for that is that if we have turned on the AP to fixed asset module integration, in process-wise, from the user experience, what that means is if we enter an AP invoice, or for that matter, purchase order process, purchase order, we can choose to interface a particular purchasing or invoice to integrate to fixed assets. This integration usually is triggered by an account called fixed asset clearing account. So when, for example, if we enter AP invoice and instead of coding to a balance sheet asset account, we always post the invoice to the fixed asset nominated fixed asset clearing account, then the fixed asset will receive a trigger saying, noting that there is a fixed asset related AP or POP, purchase order processing transaction that just happened. From fixed asset module perspective, then in the fixed asset general information screen, there is a purchasing field that we can get a so-called pull-down list to view the invoice amount and other information there. So that if we pull this information down, we'll make the fixed asset addition or creating new assets a faster or efficient process. At the same time, we kept the integration or /link between the fixed asset to AP module. So that's just a, additional information I put that in as part of the year-end process. So to just explain the importance of the sequence when we run the fixed asset module year-end. So we have to make sure AP has done everything in terms of purchasing for fixed asset module for the year that you are closing. So that's the reason we run fixed asset module year and after AP. Okay, that said, the list of things to prepare or to check before we can run the year-end process for fixed asset modules are, as the list displayed here, we need to complete AP end of year first, and I just explained why. Ensure also fixed asset calendar is built correctly. Now, usually fixed asset calendar, once it's built, is looking at your GL calendar, how it was set. Okay, unless you change your GL financial calendar, then fixed asset calendar needs to be rebuilt. But if we do that, there are more implications than just to simply rebuild fixed asset calendar. But when you need to do that, I strongly recommend you contact PA for assistance, because that's not a simple process. But let's come back to the fixed asset year-end checklist. And we have to also make sure all activities for the current financial year for the fixed asset book, if you have more than one that you wish to close, have been completed. Things like, any new assets, any changes, retirements or transfers, that has been processed for the closing financial year. And more critically, we have to make sure the depreciations for every single asset through the last day of the current financial year you're trying to closing has been depreciated. Now, there is a serious consequences if we missed any assets, or any assets for any reason has not been depreciated right to the last day of the end of the calendar calendar year for fixed assets that we're trying to close, because the future year depreciation for those assets will be seriously messed up. And also, the fixing of it is not straightforward either. Again, you will need to contact us to assist you to deal with the situation if unfortunately this did happen. That's just gives us another good reason to make sure that, as part of the year end, we do have a backup somewhere we've done. So the simplest way to fix mess like that is just simply restore backup. Okay, right. So this is the fixed asset end of year process checklist. Now, what actually happened in the fixed asset module as the year end process happens, right? There are a few things which is noticeable, which are the year-to-date maintenance amount is removed and the quantity is copied into the beginning quantity field for an asset. And also the year-to-date depreciation amount is also removed. So when we say removed, it's not like wiped off. It's actually adding on to the life-to-date depreciation amount for an asset, okay? And also the cost basis is copied to the beginning year cost field. The life-to-date depreciation is copied to the beginning reserve field. So all of those changes is noticeable if you bring up the asset in the asset book screen. And also in the book, fixed asset book setup window, you'll notice the year that linked to the book is being increased by 1 year, which should be your next calendar year or financial year for the checkbook. So when you check that, when you see the year has been changed, we know the fixed asset end of year process has been done, it's completed. Now, there is a new feature added in from GP, I think it's 2015 onwards. Now that when we run fixed asset year end, we actually get a fixed asset end of year report, which a lot of organizations think that's a great feature. So if you are not quite up to that module and you really want to have that, feature to have a some valuable report to present to your auditor, then upgrade is a recommended path to take, and we can certainly help you with that. So this then concluded fixed asset year-end process and the things that need to be aware as well, I briefly mentioned. So the last module we're going to cover in this presentation is the general ledger, which is the center of the universe in any financial system, I guess. General ledger year-end. Before we go through the checklist, I just want to make a mention. In a financial system like Great Plains, it has a feature that allows us to have multiple open financial year at the same time that you can process data in. But with that, we can also, process transactions and post it into historical year. So giving that feature as well, post into history, there is not a lot of reason for an organization to keep their financial year open until very late, because one of the drawback, if you don't do your end of year processing in time, then your financial reporting may not be as easy, purely because for your balance sheet report, you won't get the accurate or correct, you won't get your beginning balance for the future financial year at all. If you are using financial reports like fixed FRX, now that hopefully most of us won't be using FRX because it's no longer supported by Microsoft. So in Managing Reporter, it's the same thing. So any balance sheet account without doing a year-end process, it's just, you won't get the beginning balances, so, which can be a bit of a hassle. Okay, come back to the end of the year GL process checklist. Obviously, we need to make sure anything you want to post to the closing financial year have been processed. And one other check that I would recommend you to do is make sure you check all of your child account settings are correct. What that means is if you have a account meant to be set up as a P&L account, but you've somehow by mistake set it to be a balance sheet account, then it's going to impact on the end of year results. And the reason is because that when GP does its general ledger end of year process, it will sum up all of the balance of your P&L accounts into a nominated retained earnings account in the general ledger setup window. So imagine that if a P&L account that's by accident set up as a balance sheet account or vice versa, then when the system goes through the end of the year, it'll look at the posting type. Yeah. So posting type meaning either this account is set up as P&L or balance sheet account to decide whether or not we remove the balance and sum it up into retained earnings, or we move the balance for balance sheet account into beginning balance area for the future financial year. So those two data shuffling will behave very differently depending on the posting type of a GL account setup. So this is the reason that we strongly recommend that we do check your post account setup prior to the year-end process. Now, in the past, we did experience that when the chart of account setup is wrong, the end of year results are impacted. So when we do need to fix that, obviously, if we have backup, no problem. We'll restore backup and change the chart of account settings for the troublemaker accounts, and then there we go. We'll run end of year process again. So again, we can see the importance of company database backup in end of year process. And once we checked all of this, had a backup done for a company database, we can then run check links and reconcile for financial file. We also need to ensure or double check, maintain history for accounts and transactions are marked in the GL setup window, if this is how we want it to be. Okay. Otherwise, the history of general ledger accounts will be removed if that's not ticked. And the implication of that is that we won't be able to run financial report into the history year, which is quite crucial or disappointing. So make sure, this options are ticked. Usually if you untick that at the beginning of the implementation, that tick should always be there, but we're double checking. And also as the part of the checklist, we can print financial reports just so when we need to check results, and that becomes really handy. And another thing we need to make sure we do is we need to make sure we've set up a future financial year. So this is so then, when the year-end process kicks in, the balance sheet accounts beginning balance for the future year has a place to put to, otherwise it will go, well, where's my future year? Okay, so that's the reason we need to make sure future financial year has been set up. And if you need to, you can also adjust the budget figures for the new year and print financial statement. Now, after all of that, we recommend you do another company database backup. So backup, after backup. Okay, now what's actually happened as part of the GL end of year process? I've briefly mentioned a few things before. A part of that is moving, P&L account balance to retained earnings and summarize balance sheet accounts, bring the balance forward as beginning balance in the new financial year. And also it reconciles and summarizes the GL balance that are accumulated throughout the year. If you use unit accounts, which are accounts you can set up in GP to capture non-financial information. After GP 2016, the historical year balance for unit accounts will be automatically removed, zeroed out. Okay, whereas before that version, you have to manually zero out the unit account balances, which, it's just something you need to remember to do. So again, that's a very popular new feature when we talk about end of years. People went, yay, finally, don't need to have one thing less to worry about. So another good reason for upgrade. As I mentioned before, from GP 2013 R2 onward, that Microsoft has adding in a new feature, which is a very complex process behind the scenes. But from the user interface perspective, it's just another checkbox you can tick saying, oopsie, there's something I forgot to do. Let's reverse the end of the financial year process. And you can do that. So this is another thing in addition to the backup that you can do. Now, when would we need to use it? Really, the scenario that I can think of is maybe as after the year end has been done for some time, people start processing a lot of transactions into the future year, then for whatever critical reason, we think we must redo the year end. Now, instead of restore backup, because we've done, transactions for maybe weeks or months down the track already, if we do restore, we're going to lose all of those data. So then reverse financial year could be a good option to have. So it's not going to impact for transactions that's already processed into the new financial year, but also allows us to reverse the year-end process. So you can do stuff. So this is a quite significant new feature from GP 2013 R2 onwards. So to get that new feature, if you're not quite running GP in that version, obviously, upgrade is the only option for you to have it. That and my mark the end of my presentation, and now I'm happy to any questions you might have.
Well, thank you very much, Susan. Look, there was obviously a lot of content to get through there, and the year-end process is an important time of the year for everyone. I certainly did note the multiple references to backup. I appreciate the emphasis there on making sure that process flows through smoothly, but also making sure that everyone's got sufficient backups along the way should anything go wrong, or should you change your mind along the way at any time. Just a couple of questions before we wrap up. We've been answering some of those questions along the way during the session. Just a couple of really quick ones before we finish off. Can we set up the new financial year months before closing or rolling the current financial year?
Yep. The answer to that question is yes. You can set up future financial years anytime as long as prior you do the last financial year end. Okay, so you can setting those up. The good tips to do that is you can, as part of the year, and you go, well, in case I forgot that before the next financial year set up, I'll set up 2 or 3 new financial years in a row. So you can do that, but make sure you close all the modules for that new financial year. If you're not quite there yet, meaning that if you don't need to, by mistake, post any transaction into the new financial year.
Into the future, yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you. Just a couple of other quick ones there, Susan. Just there's one here about an age trial balance. So the age trial balance to print, it was suggested to print the historical age trial balance, and you've recommended the age trial balance with options.
Sorry, yes, correct.
Oh, okay, okay. So we do want to print the historical age trial balance.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, okay, okay, excellent. Thanks for the clarification. And then maybe just one last one really quickly. If we do the general ledger end of year and then have audit adjustments, can we process those entries?
You certainly can. I think I briefly mentioned that during presentation. GP does allow you to post back into the last closed financial year. So you can't skip a financial year, post into the year you closed 2 years ago. But certainly you can post back into the last closed financial year. And as part of that posting, what GP does is if your journal impacts on P&L account, that post amount will be automatically, as part of the journal process, adding on to the retained earning account balance as beginning year balance for the future year. And if it's impacting, similarly impacting a balance sheet account balance, that posting amount will be summarized into the account's next financial year beginning balance automatically.
Brilliant, excellent. Thank you, Susan, for handling those extra questions there along the way as well. Look, I just wanted to wrap up with a couple of final notes and final items to mention. So just moving on, there's just the last couple of slides there. So just a little advertisement. We do have upcoming webinars that we think you'd be interested in. So we are doing one around building a business case for budgeting and forecasting solutions. So we certainly know that from a GP user perspective, budgeting and forecasting is generally part of that remit. So it'd be great if you could come along and have a look at that webinar around budgeting and forecasting. We also have some follow-on work around Power BI. We have some training coming up. So we did do a webinar recently that was very popular with our GP users, which was taking advantage of Power BI solution and connecting that to your Dynamics GP database. So we've got some training coming up on that, and a hack day. The hack day is a way to actually get in and make use of Power BI. So we've got a couple of days training coming up in Sydney and Melbourne, and also the hack day in addition to that in Sydney and Melbourne as well. And just lastly, before we finish off today, I did mention at the very beginning that we appreciate that this year-end process is hopefully something you only have to do once a year. So if you do need our help with it, please reach out to your account manager. If you're not sure who your account manager is, I've got my contact details up there. You can certainly reach out to me and I'll connect you with your account manager. And as we leave the webinar today, as you exit the webinar, there will be a little survey question that pops up, and that'll give you the opportunity right there and then you can express your interest in getting access to a consultant, and your account manager will follow up. So if you do want to book a consultant, you can answer that in the survey at the very end. So I just wanted to say once again, thank you. Thank you to Susan for taking us through today's presentation, and thank you to everyone for attending. We will send a link out to today's session, so you will get that content that you can have another look at and also share with someone else within your organisation. So thanks everyone. Have a great end of financial year, and hopefully we'll see you in another one of our sessions soon. Bye for now.